Уважаемые участники панели.
Thank you, dear participants of the panel discussion. Let us open our session. Okay, as you can see, on the stage we have all the participants of the panel discussion, and let me tell you that a number of our speakers are sitting in the front row. They have a lot to tell you, trust me. This session is about the relationship between Eurasian Economic Union, Russian Federation and European Union. This session is always being held over the past few years in this very conference hall, and I can tell you that we had a very busy day. The European Union ambassador visited this session 2 years ago, and the majority of those present here, they have been here last year as well at this session. So let's start by discussing the possibilities of common grounds and common interests of these two organisms having a similar history, being very close to each other historically and not only. And let's start with a brief slideshow. Okay, this is not for us. Okay, where can we have our slides? Okay, this is the first slide. You see that we are next to each other on a large continent, the European Union, with 502 million people population, and Eurasian Economic Union having 183 million people population. But altogether, we are 700 million people. And this is a community which can develop themselves inside their borders, but at the same time, the European Union and Eurasian Economic Union have people who are very demanding to the quality of products and services offered in their territory. On this slide, you can see information about the development of our relationship. You know that a few years ago, it was declared that Russia starts looking eastward and starts a more active collaboration with our eastern neighbors. And to my joy, our still main partner, trade partner, is the Eurasian Union. But if we look at the changes in mutual trade, you see that commodities trade with China is growing, and moreover, next week, a huge delegation from the People's Republic of China is coming to Russian Federation to finally adopt and sign an agreement between the European between the Eurasian Economic Commission and the Ministry of Commerce of China. And this is what we have to remember when talking about the relationship between the two units. And there is another important thing I'd like to tell you. Any country, any union or association, when structuring its relations with others, is doing this also to lift barriers. What barriers do we have in this case? The European market, our largest partner, is partner number 3 in terms of the number of obstacles for Russian-made products import. And of course, we discussed with a colleague of the European Union ambassador, and we saw that there is also something of the kind in relations with the Eurasian countries. We were informed about wage requirements. It was a big obstacle for our products. So we actually produced our own regulation on safety of chemicals, even though I don't think it will be as big an obstacle as a similar provision was for Russian-made goods. In 2016, we had a very similar discussion, and we decided that everybody should vote for which issue should be the key business issues in terms of improving our relations. And number one, everyone voted for was the visa issues that have to be lifted. And let me tell you, over the past 2 years, nothing changed, nothing improved during these past 2 years. Technical regulation. I can tell you 2 years ago, a permanent dialogue on technical regulation died between Russia and Brussels. Only now we are resuming these negotiations regarding standardization and regarding the new regulations imposed by the European Union. That's why it's a yellow sign on the traffic lights. And number 3 is customs regulation. I still think we have a lot of obstacles in the customs regulations, yet the new customs code is a big step forward in order to optimize this process. And since now we are talking about digital economy, we will definitely advance also in simplifications of the customs procedures. I have not yet introduced to you all the speakers we have here, but I'll introduce them one by one. So the first speaker I would like to give the floor to is Tatiana Volovaya. She's a unique person because she was at the very outset of the birth or foundation of the customs union. Then she was one of the initiators of codification of all the treaties that were signed between the countries. And today she is the Minister of Foreign Relations, and she really does a lot for the union. And of course, you are the first person we would like to listen to. Thank you very much. Thank you for introduction. Not being very modest maybe, but I can say that I was also there when the European Union was being born. Really, because on December 8, 9, 10, and 11, 1991, I was in Maastricht watching the Maastricht process. That's why I will remember that till the end of my life. I remember that the European Union was being born at the moment when the Soviet Union was collapsing. Actually, it was the same day when a new European Union was born and the old Soviet Union died. And when the European Union was created, then Eurasian ideas emerged. And let me tell you, when you introduced the Eurasian Union and the European Union, showing them on the map, I can tell you that, of course, thanks to the European Union, Eurasian Economic Union was born. There is no doubt about it. Our European colleagues were very successfully building their economic union, their currencies, and so on. Coming to our country, they said politically we have made our choice, but economically we would like to organize a single economic space. And honestly, in 1990s, I'm very grateful to our European colleagues who helped us a lot in drafting a lot of treaties on economic union, on integration, and so on. And these treaties actually transformed themselves later on into the Eurasian Economic Union. So we have always regarded the European Union as our elder brother you can learn a lot from. You should not repeat your elder brother's mistakes, but you should learn on the clever things your elder brother does. And that's why a lot of our experience within the in terms of creation of the Eurasian Economic Union is based on the best of the best we could take from the experience of the European Union. And unfortunately, we do not have now the kind of dialogue with the European Union which would be logical to have. In the 1990s, we had a very fruitful dialogue, but not anymore, unfortunately. And it's not just because of the politics of the past few years. Even in 2013, when Eurasian Economic Commission was born, we suggested to our European colleagues to start a dialogue, yet this suggestion was not supported by them, and we perfectly well realized that there were certain political reasons for this, and they will probably persist, these reasons. So to start a dialogue between the two unions without any involvement of any political context is what we are hoping for. We have our own supranational competence. We have the countries, member countries, and we think, all of us think that we need a dialogue between the two unions. You already gave us a couple of figures. Let me tell you a bit more of statistics for you to understand what happened. In 2016, a historical event happened. It is a historical event. For the first time, import from the European Union into the Eurasian Economic Union was smaller than import of goods from the Asian countries. It was a historical event, and this trend is true both for 2016 and 2017, even though the import between our unions increased a bit last year. But this trend, it's still there. And we see that if we do not now make any effort, the increase of trade with Asian countries is going to grow further and exponentially. And this means that we will have a lot of economic problems in our relationship with the European Union. And let's think about the cost of this and what we lose. Talking about what unites us, it's a delicate thing in whatever you think of. Partnership for modernization. This concept was discussed even years ago. It is of interest for us now in the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union. That's why we do need a dialogue with the European Union. I'm very glad that we have Mr. Ambassador participating in our dialogue. And we see that at the level of working commissions, there is a will to start a dialogue. I had a meeting not long ago when we jointly with the Vienna Institute on Systemic Applied Research, we presented our project, so there was some dialogue already at lower level. And of course, we would like to transform this dialogue into something tangible. What is important for us now? Number one, we need a normal dialogue between the two commissions in a business-like dialogue. For customs administration, trade policies, and others, this is what we need to discuss between the two unions. We need a business-like dialogue. But at the same time, it's high time to discuss some higher goals. You remember the concept of single Euro economic space, which was forwarded by the President of Russia and Mr. Rodi. And you remember we had 18 dialogues for common economic spaces. Isn't it time to come back to this concept, to discussion of it, but on a union-to-union level? Because now, in the globalization time, it really matters. When we are talking about the previous globalization attempt, there was no globalization per se. There was globalization, but piece by piece. We had no global institutions. We had no global governments. And we see now that the organizations like WHO, IMF, and others hoping to be considered global, they are not really global ones. And that's why this global governance can only be born in a partnership, in continental partnership between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, and in partnership with China. And the European Union sooner or later will come back to resuming partnership with the United States. The United States will also start soon discussing a partnership with the Asian countries, I'm sure. And if it all starts and happens, we will be able to have a more balanced economy, I think. And now talking about the Silk Route, about the relationship of the European and Eurasian Economic Union relations with China, I see that the European Union is also ready to resume the dialogue on this topic. Currently, we have a dialogue which is not politicized now, but we need to think about our future dialogue. We already see positive signals about this. We have a good consensus in our union, and of course, countries have brilliant relations with the European Union. Our colleagues from Kazakhstan have just signed a treaty on partnership and collaboration. Some other colleagues have a treaty with Kyrgyzia. Our Armenian colleagues have signed a new treaty with the European Union. The situation in relationship between Belarus and European Union is improving, so we are now in a very favorable situation to change the dialogue. Of course, we very much need the support of business, because European business always speaks about the necessity of resuming a dialogue. They say this at every conference and forum, and I'm very grateful for them for speaking about this. I already told you about the report which we presented jointly with the Eurasian Bank. The new project now is at its second phase, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that on February 7 we are planning to hold a roundtable meeting and make a presentation in the framework of this topic and in the framework of the Business Week. And after that, we agreed that we will have a similar presentation in Brussels. And if we start going along all these lines, along all these tracks, then by next year, probably we'll be able to change the traffic lights from yellow to green, maybe. Okay. I looked into my notes and I see that I made a silly mistake. I guess everyone sitting here knows who Tatiana is, but I forgot to tell you exactly who she is, that she is a minister and a member of Commission for Integration and Macroeconomics of Eurasian Economic Commission. She spoke about the global governance and global governments. It is a tool for globalization, and some of you, I'm sure, thought about it, but not long ago, a report of the Roman Wise Men Club was issued where Mr. Primakov and Mr. Kapitsa were members of. It's a global club, and they published a global report. The old world is doomed, the new world is inevitable. And this report brings up an old philosophy problem that the speed of development of mankind is so high now that very soon we will have to end up with having a global government to preserve our civilization. I think this is a very deep idea we need to sleep with.
So in a situation of coexistence of the European Union and the Eurasian Union acquires a new meaning, or indeed a note, because it is here where we have the intellect whereby we can try and seek for ways of cooperation. I'm very honored to have the ambassador of the European Union here today. I would like to draw your attention to 2 points in his political biography. He has been ambassador of the EU to China and Mongolia. And today, as he's in Moscow, I think he has a very multifaceted, complex picture, because he can see the Eurasian continent as a whole. So it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me today. It's a particular honor to speak at the Gaidar Forum. I'm much older than Tatiana, but I remember being on a posting in Moscow. I was in charge of economic affairs at the German embassy when Yegor Gaidar became Minister of Economy. And I think I also would like to pay tribute to his ideas of open markets, because this is also what we are talking today when we talk about the relationship between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. Also, because I'm so old, I must say that while Tatiana was there when the European Union was born, I was born on the day when the treaties of Rome on the European Economic Community were signed. Of course, I didn't live through this consciously, but it was the 10th of November 1957. And this is why last year the European Union celebrated its 60th birthday. Had I done this presentation, you would imagine that I would have presented a few different slides. I will not go into this, but maybe just one remark on the red light on visas. If you talk about visa-free regime, yes, that was suspended after Ukraine. But Russia, I cannot speak now on Kazakhstan, but Russia's citizens are the biggest group of Schengen visa recipients globally. Globally, more than Chinese, by the way. And China, if I remember well from my stay in China, is in population terms 10 times bigger. So every year, Russians receive 3.2 million Schengen visa, and 80% of those are multiple visas. So for businesses, it's very easy to travel, as Mr. Schauf will possibly confirm. Turning to the question, and to the questions also the minister asked, why are we not more advanced? Let me try to explain from a European point of view, European Union point of view, why we are not more advanced. I will be somehow the bad cop on this panel, because everybody will try to convince me that we should do more. But there's, on the one hand, there's more than you would believe, and on the other hand, there are some serious impediments, and I think we just have to analyze them, see how we overcome them, in order to move forward. I mean, my first remark may seem counterintuitive to you. Yes, the European Union is in favor of economic integration organizations such as the Eurasian Economic Union. We are born and based upon the same idea, as you said. We look favorably at that. The European Union very much supported Russia's entry into WTO, recognized Russia as a market economy, by the way, something the European Union has not been granting to China. Even so, the European Union trade is by many times bigger with China than with the Eurasian Economic Union or with Russia for that purpose. So we look favorably at these economic integration associations. We have formal relations with Mercosur, with ASEAN, a number of other organizations. That would be my first remark. My second remark is that when we always say there is no dialogue, then the European Commission's approach is the following. yes, let's talk about what really is an issue between us. Let's talk about those technical barriers you were presenting here. I mean, on this one, I would have presented a different slide. I recently talked to Minister Eurasian, who also said, you have so many trade barriers. And I said, Minister, I'm ready to come in with a presentation, and we compare your trade barriers and our trade barriers, and I'm sure we look better. But apart from that, we are talking, as the Minister would confirm, on technical impediments to our trade. We had, in the last quarter of last year, a high-ranking delegation from DG Trade, Directorate General of Trade in the European Commission here in Moscow. They held talks with the Eurasian Economic Commission. We talked chemicals and pharmaceuticals and a number of other things. Because, we think that we should move forward in substance. And in a way, I must also say that this is a bit of a test about the usefulness, the desirability, and the perspective and the direction which relations at a higher level could take if we arrive there. Now, we followed up on this. Minister will be able to confirm that with some written information on which we expect some feedback. And I think if we move forward on what people say is a technical level, we could also consider getting more deeply involved with each other. Now, let me add a third point, and that's maybe more difficult to overcome. When the European Union engages more formally with European economic integration organizations, it looks at two things. Is there a true internal market? And how liberal is the foreign trade regime of this particular organization? And I will not conceal from you that there are some second thoughts when the European Union from Brussels looks at what's happening in the Eurasian Economic Union. I mean, just to give you a few examples, recently we have seen a total border blockade between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. You will not see this in the European Union. We have seen, and we're still seeing, problems for access of Belarusian milk to the Russian market. And about 3,000 products are exempted, from the intra-trade, from the intra-Eurasian Economic Union trade. 3,000 products are exempted from the single customs tariff. That's 1/3 of the overall product lines. So there are some doubts whether this is a truly internal market which functions without problems. And when you look at the outside trading regime, we see that some countries deviate from the Eurasian Economic Union trade policy. 4 countries have free trade with Moldova and Ukraine. 1 country, Russia, has imposed trade restrictions. There's a problem with transit of these countries' goods through Russia when they want to go to other Eurasian Economic Union countries. And there's, you asked about the differences between the two organizations. It strikes us that still 85% of the Eurasian Economic Union trade is with the outside world, and there's very little intra-Eurasian Economic Union trade. In comparison with the EU, it's only 37% of its trade directed to the outside world, and the rest is intra-European Union trade. This speaks a little bit to the trade barriers, to the complementarity of the markets, which are also questioned when it comes to the Eurasian Economic Union. And I will tell you openly that there are people in the European Union who believe that the Eurasian Economic Union is mostly a Russian-dominated project. Russian-dominated because 85% of the overall GDP is Russian, 80% of the population is Russian. I come from Germany. 27% of the European Union's GDP is German, 27 as compared to 87, by the way. And the Germans hold 16% of the population, so it's much more complementary. This leads the European Commission, which is looking at the technical aspects and how to engage with other organizations. This leads the European Commission look skeptically at lifting our relationship to a higher level. But let me end on a positive note here. In two letters, European Commission President Juncker, which he wrote to President Putin in 2015, and which he wrote to Chairman Sargsyan in 2016, he committed to our joint vision of an integrated economic space between Lisbon and Vladivostok. And I think we should retain from this discussion that we still share this goal. It is difficult to achieve today, I must say. President Juncker also, and this is on the negative side, referred to the fact that when we want to come back to this, member states will have to decide, and they will have to decide this in the overall political context. And it is no secret that the overall political context, in particular in EU-Russia relations, is not the best. We have sanctions, counter-sanctions. The EU sanctions are coupled to the implementation of the Minsk agreements, where there's very little movement. And so, as much as we can deblock and find a paradigm change in EU-Russia relations when we move forward on the implementation of the Minsk agreements, I would say that we also will be able to move forward more actively, more courageously on the relationship between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. So it's not only black and white. There are some action lines which we can pursue, in particular when we talk about certain product lines, technical issues and standards. We all see China emerging big. And if we don't put some speed behind the vision of Lisbon to Vladivostok, people will talk about Lisbon to Shanghai, which should make us all a bit nervous in this room, Europeans and Russians alike. So let's work constructively on this relationship. I'm here to help that, but we have to overcome some of the obstacles.
Спасибо большое, господин посол. В ходе вашего выступления вы сказали о том, что
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You have said that sometimes the behavior of the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union may be puzzling. I am virtually the coeval of the EU, and my granddaughter is a coeval of the Eurasian Union. We love each other, we play with each other, but sometimes she's becoming foolish. So in this sense, I think that the Eurasian Union quite deservingly may be an object for cooperation, just as much as my granddaughter is. This is just a lyrical digression, which may not be a proper example, but I couldn't help quoting it. Our next speaker, however, may turn tables on me and indeed have his own opinion. Mr. Damat Kaipovich has been Prime Minister of Kyrgyzia for several years. He is a very high authority expert. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have known Yegor Timurovich Gaidar, and being in the government, Mr. Gaidar, already in the Russian government, became a consultant to our government, and we knew him as a great scientist, but he was also a very practical person. If he had been here in this audience, he may have asked a question. Are there many persons in this audience who are I think that there are many people here who would agree that we need to be friends, but it is impossible to be friends because of the political wall that has been erected. So then what are we doing here? What is the purpose of this meeting, of this assembly? Well, a great advantage of Mr. Gaidar's forum is this ability to exchange opinion in spite of titles, ranks, or even credentials. So let me digress a little bit from the formalities that we have accepted so far and inform each other and try to tell each other what is happening with us. I am neither a Russian nor a European, but we are a member of the Eurasian Economic Union. Our trade volume with the European countries is close to zero, but and we feel all the negative consequences of the straitened and tense relations between Russia and Europe. We are interested in the barriers to be removed, but the solution of this is beyond our control. However, let me mention several specific aspects. For 4 years, as Deputy Prime Minister and then Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan, I remember that before the Ukrainian events, the West did not welcome the expansion of the Eurasian Economic Union. And I remember this from my personal visits to Europe. I remember being told this is the revival of the Soviet Union. Russia wants to bring back the empire. And indeed, when we look at the Articles of Association of the Eurasian Union, you may well see the great similarity with the EU. There is not a word about politics, and in addition, the veto right and consensus permit smaller countries to move forward even more than Russia, because Russia is in a way a donor. But we decided to join the union in spite of the critique from the West, because who else do we have to ally with but our main economic allies, Kazakhstan, the Russian Federation, with whom we have unified social, educational, and economic space. So why should we not enter such a community? So availing of our sovereignty, availing of the encouraging public opinion in my country, we have decided to join this community of states as a member. So unfortunately, however, the fact that a wall has been erected precludes the development of our relations further. Well, what is to be done? What is to be done? We just have to seek the windows, the little opportunities. But running 100-meter distance, trying to beat a world record when you're wearing army boots is difficult, and we just have to do our utmost to develop these relations. Maybe a Silk Road will bring something, some new things up. Clearly, this will be truly the result of cooperation or indeed interaction between two economic superpowers, China and Europe, and we may see some, hopefully, some interesting things and progress happening. We have a common border with China, and we can see things happening. Let me just add that to Central Asia, to Kazakhstan, to Kyrgyzstan, it is very important to continue our relations in Europe, but they need to be defrozen. Yeah. There's a lot of artifice in our relations at the moment. We can't close our eyes to this. We need an exchange of opinions, but as we say, the people who are discussing, I hope that this assembly is here 2 years next. Let us just hope that there will still something to discuss in 2 years. Well, we have two cameras working in this hall, and last year when we were talking about these questions, and we spoke about this in the Far Eastern Forum. So the audience is quite larger, and we are televising and broadcasting this, so let me say the following. When two parties try to cooperate, it is important to understand each other. As I was responsible in the government for economic planning, I was given a task by Mr. Medvedev, who was told in Brussels, take all of the norms of the EU and observe these in your union. So I spent inordinate amount of time with my colleagues from ministries, and when I met Mrs. Ashton, I showed her that planting the EU legislation on the Eurasian soil as of today would simply be inconceivable, because together with our Brussels colleagues, we have elaborated a gradual roadmap for the development of technical rapprochement between our systems. And so let us take the. We did quite a few steps in terms of bringing the economic and technical requirements closer together. I was told once in Brussels that the Ukraine would follow this path, and I think that we should follow and keep together, because any wall would become transparent to us one day. I think that Marina Vladimirovna Larionova, who is next to me, is quite a unique person. She is the vice president of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, which is indeed our key locomotive. And at the same time, she is a scientist who is analyzing the strategy of interaction. And together with that, she is a teacher, a professor at our academy, at this academy where we are today, and at the Moscow School of Economics. Marina Vladimirovna, it is my pleasure to give you the floor, and I would like to ask you if we have impermeable walls between us, or these walls can be permeated. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the kind words of introduction. I would like to react to some statements and opinions which have been voiced here today. Unfortunately, geopolitical situation is prevailing and indeed dominating business so much, and creates such a rubs on the path of the business, that the businesses have to be developing new mechanisms of cooperation, and Russia is often criticized for trying to be bilateral rather than EU-Russia minded. When the sanctions were being prepared in 2014, we convened the Council for Economy and Investments and turned to the Russian government to say that we are against sanctions. And that year, we convened 3 times saying that we are against sanctions. And we understood that this was futile. Irrespective of our public announcements, there was, and the Russian government still decided to impose the sanctions. What is the result? As a result, 4 years later, we can see that the business is building new formats of interaction. The European business and the Russian business have gradually started to work under this very unusual regime. The Russian business is interested in working in a balanced way, not just with the Asia-Pacific region, where we have some positive dynamics, but also with the European partners. But that being said, some business associations, such as Business Euro or the German Association, were so influenced by the political opposition of the EU and the national member states that they froze the dialogue with the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs as de facto, if not de jure. What are the new mechanisms, however, and the new opportunities? We have increased the volume of our cooperation with some associations in Europe. So the dialogue has not been abolished or suspended, but the general investments on the part of the Russian business continue. And I think that Mr. Shao would concur. And it is clear that we can see, as we have this interest on both sides, we have an interest on the part of both the Russian and the European business to deepen the dialogue with the European Commission. And in this sense, I think that the business is working in quite an active way, especially as we speak about the European Technical Requirements Committee and the economic standards, the industry branch conventions and meetings.
For instance, in construction, in digitalization, and a very important area where we can collaborate is to simplify the trade procedures. All the countries except Belarus have joined the trade facilitation agreement, but unfortunately we have a good progress only in some of the areas, but this is a topic for further collaboration. European Union would understand this. Now at the Eurasian Economic Union, we are a growing organism, a growing baby. So the Eurasian Business Council and Eurasian Economic Union are working on formation of a common market. And we have a program for overcoming the limitations and exemptions. And we are working on this. It should be the topic for collaboration with the European Union or digital economy. This is a new topic. If you look at the program of Eurasian Economic Union for digitalization of economy, and if you look at the digitalization of the European market, a program by the European Union, we see a lot of common goals very similar goals, even though we definitely are at different stages of digitalization, but yet this is a field for further collaboration. It's obvious. And business communities, they do already collaborate. They signed an agreement on digitalization of economy, and it's real sad. We do have a very good bilateral collaboration, a very successful one, but we would envisage to have a multi-party collaboration. I could suggest to partner in digitalization of economy, right? Of course, there are lots of areas where we could collaborate, but let's find some key ones. And even though the role of the state is very important there, but we could find some common grounds and collaborate on other topics as well. Of course, we do have a lot of issues, but we do have some success as well. For instance, among 15 special investment contracts, 5 of them are concluded with European corporations, and these are different corporations from various industries, from various countries. It's Sanofi, AstraZeneca, Class. These are different regions of Russian Federation that have these special investment contracts signed. It's from Orlov Oblast and other regions of Russia, which shows that special investment contract is one of successful tools of localization and of organization of collaboration, which really works. And now let's talk about mechanisms and platforms. Tatiana said that the academic community works jointly with the Institute of Systemic Analysis, which has prepared a report on this topic. And now, for instance, we support some initiatives in this respect. There is also a very good economic forum. It's a Eurasian forum already, which started as a forum which was purely Italian and Russian, but we need to build further this dialogue with the European Economic Commission, and our businesses are also ready to participate in this dialogue as much as possible. Thank you very much. Listening to you, I remembered our yesterday's plenary discussion. One of our speakers represented Finland. Finland is not a very big country, and after this speech, we decided to look at what he was talking about. He said that the countries that very actively participate in foreign trade activities, importing, exporting commodities, they have a good opportunity for a breakthrough. We looked at Slovakia. Slovakia imports automotive parts and automobiles for 2.5 billion, and Slovakia sells automobiles and parts making 3.5 billion. They supply engines, electrotechnical equipment, and many other products, so the majority of automotive industry plants in the European Union. Why can't we have it in our Eurasian economic community? Mr. Schaufman, I would like to give the floor to you now. I found a person who graduated a high school in Germany and also in Switzerland, but he's creating something which is very much developed in the European Union. They are creating a program for subcontracting, so that via a digital platform you could find partners who need technologies, but they have no way to develop and implement these technologies on their own. And this guy, he lives in Tatarstan, even though he's a graduate of German and Swiss high school. It's Mr. Mayorov. He's CEO of the National Subcontracting Portal. And he told me, getting ready for this meeting, you know, we have 12 countries in this platform. Of course, Europe-wise, this is not much, but there are also European countries in this platform. So, Sergey, I don't know how you are going to deliver your speech. Okay, let me stand next to you then. Not to turn my back to you and not to turn my back to the audience. So please give me slide number 7 on the screen. You know, honestly, we are not in politics. We are doing business. And I would like to thank Mr. Shokhin and Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs for supporting us. And you know, there is nothing better for development of international collaboration than signature of real contracts. We developed the following concepts. First of all, we focus on cluster ideology. I work in the largest automotive cluster in Tatarstan. Well, if people say so, we cannot say you are not what you are. Okay. What else? Cooperation between entrepreneurs and authorities in creating innovative products which could be globally competitive. And a bit less than 3 years ago, we realized that in such an advanced region as Tatarstan, it would still take a lot of effort to organize such collaboration. That's why we decided to attract all the most required and the best competencies. For instance, sometimes we needed to replace imported goods or other tasks we had, and we created an automated platform which is called the National Portal of Subcontracting. Please show me slide number 9. And here, if you open the screen, you can receive orders without any intermediaries. There is a limitation to access, which means that you can have access with references of some NGOs, chambers of commerce, governments, or whoever, with a written confirmation that, yes, this is a manufacturer of something. And then you can have access to this platform. If you look at the history of our relations, we have had it was on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, and the Prime Minister of Saxonia in Germany, he really said, you know, even in Germany we don't have such efficient platforms. And the first German companies placed orders for production of complex parts. They even posted the terms of reference with the drawings and calculations, and those who are able to manufacture what was required, they didn't need an intermediary to find this order. But again, these companies having access to this platform and collaborating, they need to be recommended by somebody or referred to this system by somebody. And it works very simple. First, you place an order. It's slide number 17. And this order is either a terms of reference or technical documentation, anything that may be confidential. After this, you click a button denoting what area you would like to have reviews of. And here you see we have IT and other areas. And then it is registered that the order has been placed, after which the technologists and producers look at what available capacities they have. They click on the contact of the employer, and you have it. And there has never been any problem, really. The only problem now is the following. I'm taking the advantage of the fact that we have also foreign guests here. If you recommend any companies, we actively consult and actively place them in our portal. But again, the portal will be efficient if we increase the number of participants sevenfold. And the last slide I wanted to show to you, please scroll forward. Okay, here you see the 12 countries which today work on this portal. And you see all the Eurasian Economic Union countries and some European Union countries work there today. The Ministry of Industry of the Russian Federation and the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation monitor these activities. So those of you who have anything to offer, please get registered, please, and we will help you with it. Thank you very much. If you had slide 47, which would state, no, you can see here on slide 28 something also very important. You know, Mr. Shaw, you are the head of European business. You are a doctor of philosophy. My question is about the report of the Roman Club. But again, first I would like to talk about the development of relationship between the two unions. I know a lot of European entrepreneurs from different industries who, no matter what, still see good prospects for our collaboration, and they collaborate actively. There are companies in the Russian market which have been here for more than a century, and they do continue collaboration. What do you think we have to do? We are not politicians. So the question is, what are the tasks of the business community so that the relations between the two unions be very good?
A slight correction. I am formally a doctor of philosophy, but in fact I'm a historian, because history is part in Germany of the philosophical faculty. So don't ask me any philosophical questions, because you will not get the right answer, at least what you expect. The Association of European Businesses is, let's say, the main representation of foreign investors in Russia, but it's only, by definition now, the main representation of foreign investors in the Eurasian Economic Union. And certainly we are observing very much what is happening with the Eurasian Economic Union, but also in the interaction between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. Let's say first some words about the Eurasian Economic Union. The first thing which I want to say is that, let's say, coming from the European Union and having certainly also the practical and historical experience of the European Union, the companies and the representatives of the companies from Europe are in principle in favor certainly of also integration in the Eurasian area. So there is no, let's say, principled resistance or contradiction against that integration project. Second, what I want to say is that certainly also with regards to the interaction between us as an organization and the Union, we started the interaction already at a very early point when the customs union already was established in the last decade. And over the years, the interaction, now also with the Eurasian Economic Commission, has grown very much. And let's say the written, but also the oral communication between us and the Eurasian Economic Commission is becoming more and more important for us. But let's put it like this, there are certainly also some questions around this which are interesting to observe in the first instance. Since we are in an academy, perhaps I can also look at it from a little bit more academic point of view. First, the ambassador already mentioned it. It's an interesting fact that the intra-Eurasian Economic Union trade is much smaller than the external trade of these countries. So this is certainly something which says something about the character, the quality of that trade, and especially certainly the main two countries are to a certain degree competing with their exports, let's say with regards especially to the European Union, because for both the European Union is the largest export market. And this certainly is something which is very much different from what is happening in the European Union, where you already over decades and over 100 years or 150 years, in spite of the wars which happened, you have a strong interaction between the different economies which are now part of the European Union. Second, I heard a lot of statements at the beginning of the Eurasian Economic Union that the Eurasian Economic Union is learning from the historical experience of the EU. And therefore, it is a correct thing to do, but therefore it would be much quicker integration than the European Union was. But I think, let's say now over the years, it has become also more clear that the integration process inside the Eurasian Economic Union is much more difficult than perhaps people have foreseen in the beginning. This has also to do with the mechanism of decision making, because if there has to be unanimity between the partners, it means certainly that also the minor partners, the smaller partners, are blocking things which Russia might perhaps want. And this might make certainly the picture much more complex than those who have started the integration process perhaps have thought before at the initiation of this process. Now again, if I may say this, we have a growing interaction with the Eurasian Economic Commission over the years. I can mention, let's say, 3 examples of our communication and interaction. One is, for example, the issue of intellectual property rights. We have seen that with regards to developing the Eurasian market, that the Eurasian Economic Commission and the Union have, let's say, a say in this area on the basis of the treaty. I can mention the example which is very important for us, for our members, which is the question of the legalization of parallel imports, which parts of the Russian government are supporting, but the Eurasian Economic Union is not supporting at the moment, because there is contradiction from some of the member countries, and this is certainly a very interesting thing for us. Second, we have been interacting with the Eurasian Economic Commission on customs issues a lot. We have made missions also with the respective ministers to Western Europe in order to show how modern customs regulation are put into practice in Germany, in Italy, for example, in the past few years. And I think this was a very good show of how to cooperate between also not us and the Eurasian Economic Commission, but also with the Italian and German authorities on that specific question. Another point is technical regulation. We have seen that the dialogue, the formal dialogue of technical regulation has been slowed down because from the European side the financing ended with regards to technical relation cooperation between Russia and the European Union. We have been discussing with the European Commission over, let's say, a number of months, over nearly 2 years, 1.5 years, that we would like to see a renewal of this. And because we think that it's very important that there is technical regulations being formulated on the level of the Eurasian Economic Union, which makes it easier also for our business to take advantage of this larger market. And in fact, we can say that we have this communication with the Eurasian Economic Commission, and now also we are very grateful and very happy that in November, I think it was, that the delegation came from DG Trade, amongst others, also in order to discuss these things, and we are positive that the dialogue on technical relation is going to be renewed in the nearest future. We, as Association of European Businesses, are lobbying for a closer communication between the European Commission and the Eurasian Economic Commission, because we see it necessary that these two partners who are sharing responsibility on the European continent have a constructive approach to each other. But certainly, I mean, things have been mentioned with regards to Ukraine and the conflict around Ukraine and sanctions. We also understand certainly that these political questions, which need to be solved by the political side, need to be resolved in order to, let's say, engage in a closer cooperation between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union. Now let's make, let's say, towards the end, two critical remarks towards the Eurasian Economic Commission. It's not touching your responsibility. But we are, and it's coincidental that it's related to the chemical industry. We are seeing, let's say, two processes now which are of major concern for us. First, there is an anti-dumping process by the Eurasian Economic Commission against foreign manufacturers of pesticides, because of the statement that they would have a behavior of dumping on the Russian or Eurasian market, which is not possible to be proven. And we expect the Eurasian Economic Commission that they play along internationally accepted rules with regards to anti-dumping measures. And this is, from my point of view, also important because the European Commission is also observing it. And certainly, if you want to have a closer cooperation with the European Commission, let's say this kind of behavior plays a role. Another point is, you mentioned REACH at the beginning. Now there is a discussion around establishing a technical relation for the chemical industry on the level of the Eurasian Economic Union. And if we look into this, then this technical relation is going to be very, very difficult if it's coming into force as it is being formulated currently. I understand it's a discussion process, but if you look into REACH, I mean, there was a big discussion around REACH at the beginning, but in the end, let's say something came out of it which was acceptable for the side of the regulator as well as for the industry. And I think you have to be open to discussion with the industry, and what you also have to be in order to be competitive for the rest of the world market is that you have to apply similar technical regulations to the rest and not go for something very specific which is not in line with the international mainstream. And this is, let's say, two critical remarks which I want to make on the work of the Eurasian Economic Commission. But certainly, generally speaking, we are very positive about the communication and cooperation, and we also think that there is potential of development between the two areas, between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, but certainly the obstacles which are there, the political ones, have to be solved.
Господин Шауф, я еще раз хочу подчеркнуть, что в период...
Mr. Schauf, let me emphasize one more time that in 2009-2014 there was an extremely active and important dialogue on technical standards we're currently meeting with business groups by interests, and we can see that the business understands perfectly well that the protectionism and not permitting others, this has to be a double sided road. If we expect preferences, we have to come a step forward. And even though such preferences can be obtained in different fields, I think that the wisdom of the governments must help us.
It's not about preferences. It's about an even and transparent playing field where Russian companies can work on the European market and European companies can, without any problems, work on the Eurasian economic market. So this is...
Я с вами абсолютно согласен, но только в жизни...
Yes, I agree with you entirely. But unfortunately, life is more complex than any scheme, than any paradigm. I met Mr. Kreshko and Mr. Shakalev, the minister and the head of the department, and they are both very interested in continuing this dialogue. And on their part, let me express this to you, Mr. Ambassador. Today is an interesting day. Starting from the morning, we have talking about the following. It turned out that we have a very intensive flow of goods from China to the EU, and we have seen, we now see that in 5 days the cargo gets from China to Central Europe, and then in another day to Britain. But if the cargo clearance through Kazakhstan and the Russian Federation is quite swift, and they can make 1,500 kilometers per day. In the EU, we have at maximum 600 kilometers per day, and there is also a significant barrier because of the very intensive passenger movement. When talking to the business, we understood that we shall be asking the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation, as well as our colleagues from Belarus and Kazakhstan, to join into the discussion as to how we can make movement across the European continent more intensive. Because if we clear these bottlenecks, then we will be able to get a situation whereby cargoes can be getting from China to Europe and conversely much faster. And the cost of cargo container would not be much higher than going across the sea. So I think that this is just an example of how partnership may develop. It is about partnership between the Russian, Belarusian and Kazakhstan railroads, rail network. It is also about working with the actual cargo, with the cargo delivery. And in Brussels today, a big terminal is being inaugurated, and there are some metal related business leaders who have gone there. So let me give the floor to Mr. Zakiev, the first Deputy President of the United Transport Logistic Company, UTLC. He will present several slides, and hopefully I think that members of this panel discussion do have some reason for optimism and pride. Well, thank you very much for this honor to talk at the Gaidar Forum. Just a few words about my company. Our company, the UTLC, is a product of 3 railway network administrations. What moved Kazakh, Belarusian and Russian rail networks to pool their efforts into this one company? The volume of cargo container transportation, marine containers in 2017 was about 23 million containers in 20 feet equivalent. A couple of so the dynamic of marine transportation is quite substantial. Today, having pooled our efforts into a single company, the UTLC, In 2015, 2017, we have shown what is the dynamics of the volumes of the transported containers. So we stopped last year with about 175,000. How have we been able to achieve this? Having combined our efforts, the UTLC has been able to propose into the market, primarily to the Chinese companies, an uninterrupted route to the Polish border, which is a manifestation of the ideology of the New Silk Road. And over 2 years, we have had a certain tendency to lower the costs. Today, compared to deep sea, we are at about $1,000. But we have to realize that marine transportation has additional first and last mile costs. Here we deliver directly to the terminals, to the warehouse. Who are our partners? Well, here we see we are showing the actual speed, marine versus railroad, and that's about 5 to 6 days from China to Brest, 5 to Brest, and 6 days to Brusky. And we have also opened an additional corridor through Kaliningrad, and this is also important because we can deliver also through Baltisk or Kaliningrad as the second leg. Who are our clients? While we started in 2015 with just a few companies, and there was the major concentration in just a matter of 3 to 4 provinces of China. In 2017, we have our deliveries from 17 provinces of China, out of overall 21 provinces. So almost each province of China is making a contribution to this trains leading for Europe. As we speak about cooperation with the EU, our delivery points are virtually across Europe. We work from Madrid to London and to Poland. Of course, we started with our German terminals in Duisburg and in Hamburg, but today the geography has expanded and our containers are delivered throughout Europe. In November and December of last year, we have also crossed the channel into London. So let me say that the UTLC is a quite indicative of a successful example of partnership interaction between the EU and the Eurasian Union, which we hope will evolve into a full-scale China-Europe railroad bridge. Some difficulties have been identified along the way, primarily related to the speed. Our capacity is 1,500 kilometers per day, and that's our target horizon. And in Europe, the situation is different. As we have some problems with the transportation capacity. We are spending some time at the Kazakh border by differentiating between the European companies. And here we also have the question of some delays on the Belarusian borders. So we would generally be interested in creating an alliance with a number of European transportation companies to maybe create a terminal, not to work by carrying from, say, the eastern gates, some oriental gates in Kazakhstan, and delivering the cargo to the European border. Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, we have discussed today, and these have been heads of flagship companies. Do you believe that the diplomatic ministries or foreign offices of the member states should be involved? And the first reaction has been that this is an entirely business-to-business initiative which does not require any diplomatic channels. Well, based on my experience in working in the Ministry for Industry, I have learned that there should be, so to say, a word uttered and some contribution made by the foreign offices. And if you're interested, we could just tell you more about this later. When we speak about this transportation corridor, we should also give the floor to a person who knows perfectly well the situation in the transportation business, a professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the head of the information department of the European Development Bank. In 2007, he published a book which said that the CIS, EU and Russia challenges of integration, and he said that there are more and more of these challenges. Mr. Evgeny Vinokurov will tell us more about potential, the weak spots and the dialogue between the EU and the Eurasian Union, the EAEU. If we are to believe these data, we may see that Evgeny Yurievich will tell us more about this. Well, thank you very much. I think that the two unions need a mega deal, something that we may liken to the mega deal of FDR in the United States. But this is a long-term perspective, which is probably not up for discussion at the moment. And we have a major political crisis to discuss, plus at least 5 years of very tense negotiations. So we have, in the meantime, talk about the agenda of today. I think that visa is not about is not up for discussion. We are not going to talk about alleviation or visa-free regime until the political crisis is solved. So what is up for discussion then? Some infrastructure and some technical matters. The fiber optic is a very specific topic. The energy industry, which is an extremely difficult topic for the unified energy market, which would generally be quite a good thing, but an extremely difficult thing to discuss. So transportation corridor is one of the few things remaining which are up for discussion today. and this should include the comprehensive transportation deal. I think that all Caspian corridors are a delusion. There is no perspective, there is no outlook for the Caspian corridor, and so the only the one is the northern European corridor along the Trans-Siberian, and two through Kazakhstan. These are the only transportation venues which are of interest. Well, on the two corridors, we can see enormous growth of cargo movement, and we can see this as happening across the entire spectrum. This graph shows the accuracy and the terms for the rail transport to ensure complex advantage by convenience estimate. Our evaluation is that within the next 3 years we will see a full loading and indeed capacity reach of the regular trains from China. So as we speak about this flow, it will continue to grow, and we expect to see about 1 million. It's not a very high margin business, but quite big by volume. So we need this business. As I have said, the growth limits is shown here for the competitive advantage of the rail over marine transportation. And we have seen this. We can see that we can get about 6% of the marine transportation with premium goods and a high cost per kilo of weight. But there are some very weak spots, soft spots indeed of these risks and opportunities. Well, the Polish rail network is certainly a point of concern. In the Eurasian Union, the trains are moving with having about 71 carriages. In the EAEU, it's 1,500 and 600 in Poland, which is already fine. But what is the problem is they get suspended and stopped for 5 to 6 days. So they may be getting from China in a matter of 5 days, and then they are stopped for 4 days. And this bottleneck needs to be addressed. So we're addressing our European partners to say that Poland is a very weak link in this overall chain network. So the axis, and we need the east-west, otherwise the Silk Road will stop. Besides, we need a regulatory rapprochement, we need investment into hubs. This is a Eurasian story, and we have long, indeed, the Chinese have not invested a cent into the Russian, Belarusian, Kazakhstan network. We need about 10 major logistic hubs with about 300,000 container capacity per year. And the last thing to say is that the social pole of the European companies shipping, the shippers, the producers and the shippers who have not used the rail transit to China and from China have evaluated inaccurately the cost. So there is a lack of the cost of such rail transportation. So there is a lack of information. Such European shippers have evaluated about 1.5 times higher than the actual cost. So apart from getting rid of the bottlenecks, we also need to have an information campaign and the awareness heightened. Thank you very much indeed. I have penned down everything you said, and I will just make a short comment that if we can solve the problems which would allow us to move faster across Poland, then we shall certainly get a very convenient access to the entire European market, and we're sure that this will be demanded, of high demand, having as Belarus, Russia and Kazakhstan, Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. So I think this is an important diplomacy. We have some representatives of the business. We have the Business Russia, and we have Nona Kagramanyan here, the Deputy President of the Association. And what we would like to have is to tell us what are some rubrics or some chapters for movement forward. All right, Nona. Thank you, Vladimir Yurievich. I will just try to make 3 points. First, the good news is that we continue to convene, that we move forward in spite of everything. But the end result depends on us. If we go back to the topic, we know that the unifying forces have always been reflected in the common ideas, and we have many global problems which we have to deal with, both in the Business Association, in the EU and in the Eurasian Union. So it appears that we have to delineate a pool of problems which we could try to solve together, and hopefully this would allow us to move ahead. And any communication, any dialogue brings up new dimensions of possible cooperation in which the human capital plays the foremost role.
And if we come back to business organization and collaboration and communication in the framework of business, I'm now talking on behalf of private non-resource, non-mining business. Marina was talking on behalf of the Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, while private small business has its own problems, because in the mining industry, in the resources industry, life is different. Of course, dear colleagues, even with the geopolitical problems we have with the processes that are currently underway. Inside Delovaya Russia, we analyzed the situation and we see that the business that did work in the past, it does work now. And in all the European countries now, we have special coordinators which are in charge of liaison with the business community, so that we could enhance our collaboration. And I think that we succeed in this respect. And I think that real business community can find a solution in any situation, because the business is being done in order to make profit. And this is what makes businesses versatile in collaborating. We have ties with European associations and partners, and jointly we created a special institute where we have B2B meetings on a monthly basis. We had the Russian, French and Russian, German B2B meetings in December, and in January we met our French colleagues. And together with moderators, we can manually lift the problems that may arise. And actually there are not so many problems, honestly. Sorry, I overheard a discussion between young people in the elevator just now. And they said, we've been discussing what we should expect in 15 or 20 years, I mean in distant future. While in this quickly changing world, every day there's something new, and all these strategic planning, is it really of relevance? I still think it is. We just have to think of what we do today and tomorrow. And in this respect, I really wanted to meet this girl, ask her who she was, because she said we need to remember our mistakes we have made in the past and take advantage of the experience of our country. And I think this is what we should do. Thank you, Nona. It is a very positive thing you told us at the end. But actually, I wrote down everything we discussed here. Number one important thing is visas. And based on what Mr. Ambassador said, this is a transparent, immaterial obstacle which can be surmounted. And of course, political dialogue in this respect will start later, but we very much hope it will start. Number two issue is technical regulation. We are now starting the process, and we heard opinions on both sides. I discussed with colleagues from the European Union representative office that the European Commission is also ready to resume dialogue. Customs procedure. Now with the new customs code, we have really made a few very important steps forward. And I checked the rating of the World Bank. They don't know us very well, but they gave us a place which has digit 1, but 3 digits 1, which is 111, while Singapore was number 1. I don't think this is fair, but in any case, we need a dialogue. And thinking about infrastructural projects, we still have a lot to do together. Infrastructure is the next challenge. Infrastructure meaning also transport infrastructure. This is what we have to discuss now, because this is definitely about mutual interests of Eurasian Economic Union and European Union, and information support of our activities, telling people about our success. I was in Geneva before the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there we had a meeting to discuss activation of production processes in all countries, and all the delegates said that information support of everything that's going on worldwide is a must, is a critical necessity now. And talking about the European Union and Eurasian Economic Union, it's especially important because people should really know that we have so many successes on our way forward. Mr. Schauf, you wanted to say a few words?
let's say, most probably the question of technical regulation, which needs to be tackled in the future. I think we need to go, but here certainly the political obstacles are there. We need to go into direction of the free trade area between Lisbon and Vladivostok as the long-term vision. This has to happen. But in between, certainly lots of other things like visa regime, let's say certainly also other technical questions have to be solved. And this is all a long-term process. I mean, to assume that this is going to happen quickly, I think, is a big illusion.
Спасибо большое. У нас здесь...
Thank you so much. We have a Eurasian commissioner, Tatiana. You are the chief, the senior executive officer, as we call them very often. So the floor goes to you. What do you think about our today's discussion? Did I mean it right, what we discussed today? You know, this discussion was really instrumental, and the fact that we have this discussion on the same topic every year is a good witness to the importance of the topic. And looking at the facts and figures my European colleagues gave, I still would like to comment 2 points of what they mentioned. Otherwise, you will not sleep tight at night. The first fact is that in the Eurasian Economic Union, we have a serious problem that we have a bigger trade with the external world than domestic trade. But why this happens? This happens because we have a Russian Federation, which has 85% of trade with foreign countries, external countries. Why? Because Russia exports mainly mineral resources. But if you subtract mineral resources statistics from the total trade figures, if you look at the trade in foodstuffs, automobiles, equipment, and so on, the picture is different. The market of Eurasian Economic Union in these areas is of special importance. Number 2, if we take all other countries, we'll see that Belarus is like our Luxembourg in the European Union. The share of Belarus in our mutual trade is more than 50%. The share of Kyrgyzstan is very high. It's from 34 to 42%. Armenia's share of trade with us is also very high. Kazakhstan focuses on export of mineral resources. That's why it does not sell much to us. And we have looked at the statistics and we have analyzed all these factors and facts just recently. And we understand that this situation will remain the same for the coming future because we sell natural resources. Plus, don't forget, there are 3,000 products that have been withdrawn from trade, and this is probably not because of the European Union is to blame or on our side, but this is temporary reduction of products because of Kazakhstan. And these 3,000 products that are not being traded now, it all shows that we have a common market, unified market, which is a very functional one. Our Kazakh colleagues are saying that if the goods from this list are customs cleared in Kazakhstan, they are customs cleared at the rates of the Eurasian Economic Union, so that after customs clearance, the goods could be sent further either to Russia or to Belarus without any problem. So we see that there are really a lot of topics for discussion. Also, discuss our vision, our understanding of the same facts and figures. Thank you very much. I very much hope to see you again here at the same panel discussion next year, so that we increase our competences by next year, and we'll have something tangible to discuss. And by next year, I hope we'll have a lot of things to report on to the population of European Union representatives and population of our Eurasian Economic Union. Thank you very much.